Ordinary people who are familiar with the everyday practices of Hitler's Germany find it hard to comprehend one particular aspect. During that time, many viewed the mass murders and abuse of people as merely tedious, difficult, and unpleasant tasks, something like a general cleaning. Nevertheless, there were enthusiasts for such work. More often than not, they were found to be SS members for various reasons, and they willingly turned tedious duties into a pleasant pastime. You might wonder how they did it, so keep watching. What was special about Poland? Poland is usually seen as a region most affected by Nazism, and there are good reasons for this. Actually, no less than two. Firstly, Poland was the initial country to be captured by the Nazis through military means. That is, they simply had more time to implement their plans and for entertainments as well. Secondly, it was precisely in Poland that all the specialized extermination camps were concentrated. There were also a high density of, so to say, regular concentration camps, where murders were combined with slave labor. You might ask why Poland was so rich in concentration camps. The explanation is simple: logistics. So, concentration camps, though they were not the only ones, offered the most significant opportunity for the expression of sadistic fantasies. There were plenty of material and almost no control. Moreover, their staff consisted almost exclusively of SS members. So that's all the explanation. Sex on a grand scale. Forced prostitution and rape were practiced by the Nazis in all occupied territories, and in Poland too. However, it was not recommended for SS members, as their organization's charter categorically prohibited relationships with so-called subhumans. Of course, there was a simple way. They could use the girl they liked and then kill her. No one would care about inferior anyway. But it was still much more convenient in the concentration camps. The so-called official Slavic brothels were used more by the Wehrmacht soldiers. In Auschwitz, young, attractive women were immediately separated into the so-called Canada group upon admission, to become personal slaves and intimate servants for wardens. SS officer Eamon Goeth kept a whole group of such girls at his villa. When the master grew tired of the sex slaves, they were sent to the gas chamber. Similar practices, although often less overt, existed in other extermination camps, where the fate of prisoners was not monitored at all. Thus, the notorious overseer Irma Gries used women prisoners for her intimate purposes. As they would say now, she was bisexual. Karl Koch was transferred to Poland from Buchenwald, where he became famous, among other things, for his interest in attractive young male prisoners, which, by the way, was illegal in Nazi Germany. There is no reason to believe that his transfer to Poland weaned him from his habit. The camps provided other opportunities as well. For example, the guards eagerly examined and touched the women who had just arrived at the camp. The women immediately were forcibly stripped for changing into camp's uniforms or for execution. There is evidence that guards in Auschwitz organized forced orgies among prisoners. The SS men were entertained by watching what was happening. It is clear that they themselves regularly arranged something similar with female prisoners, many of whom were doomed to death. In general, orgies and intimate encounters with Slavs and Jews were available to the SS men in the concentration camps. However, caution had to be exercised. If somebody had reported it to the authorities, an SS man could be in serious trouble. Profession: executioner. The Nazis treated torture and humiliation quite calmly, but in a significant number of cases they did it all with a utilitarian goal: to obtain the necessary information or to intimidate people and break their will to resist. The privileged position of the SS men, especially the concentration camp guards, gave them the opportunity to use their official position to satisfy unhealthy inclinations. No one was troubled if the doomed people were killed with particular cruelty or subjected to abuse that had no practical significance. To suppress the will, sometimes very sophisticated techniques were invented. For example, in the camps, an insufficient number of toilets were deliberately arranged, so that standing in line for them would humiliate the prisoners and make them hate each other. Any little thing could become torture. For example, the prisoners of Auschwitz and a number of other camps were meticulously forced to make their beds, although this could hardly even be called a bed, in a strictly defined manner, and were punished for the slightest inaccuracy in this procedure. Sisyphean labor was commonly employed. People were compelled to spend hours shifting stones from one location to another, or for instance loading handfuls of sand into a truck. Much of the medieval arsenal were also used. Since specific methods of punishment for prisoners' misconduct were rarely specified, the SS could use, for example, hanging by the rib, and the rack was quite commonplace. Elisa Orlovsky, in Majdanek, Plaszow, and Auschwitz, loved to whip women prisoners in the face, with or without reason. Louise Dance, in Majdanek and Auschwitz, often did not give the prisoners their meager rations for 3 days and took away their clothes in winter. Hermione Braunsteiner, in Majdanek, earned the nickname the Trampling Mare because she loved to beat women to death by trampling them under their feet. Irma Gries took pleasure in unleashing dogs on the prisoners at Auschwitz. She thought it would be funny to tie the laboring women's legs tightly and see what happens. Eamon Goth, who worked in several camps and ghettos in Poland, also loved dogs. Despite the fact that this SS officer held fairly high positions, he did not disdain to personally engage in torture. He loved to present the Jewish administration of the ghetto with bills for consumables needed for killing Jews. According to the striving victim, this character is portrayed very accurately in the film Schindler's List. A minor prisoner of Majdanek testified, Jewish children of preschool age were burned alive in crematoria there. Although there was no objective need for this, they could at least have been gassed together with their mothers. Kurt Franz, one of the commandants of Treblinka, not only used a dog to attack prisoners, but also beat them personally with a whip and shot them. He especially liked, and was quite good at it, punching people with his fists. In Auschwitz, standing cells were used for torture for a long time. These were narrow boxes in which a person could neither lie down nor sit. The guards could keep people there for several days as punishment or for fun. Here also, the officers killed sick prisoners by forcing a cane down their throats. Old or sick women were forced to dance for many hours under the threat of immediate execution, to prove that they were young and strong and could work. Prisoners of war who were transported en masse to Poland at the beginning of the war were put on new army boots and forced to run for hours breaking them in, so that the Wehrmacht soldiers would not get chafed on their feet. However, much of the above was not obligatory. It's just that there were people among the SS who loved their work. Additionally, prior to the onset of the war, Arthur Lieberhenschel, who would later become the commandant of Auschwitz and was regarded as lenient, issued a directive while working with the concentration camp administration. SS officers who received the For Military Merit Cross for their participation in execution were instructed to describe their actions not as executions, but as the fulfillment of tasks crucial for military operations. Entertainment. The SS men from the concentration camps also demonstrated considerable ingenuity in inventing and organizing various games with the participation of prisoners or simply inferior people. Of course, such a practice existed not only in Poland, but in Poland there were the most opportunities for it to flourish. The victims could have been Jews, Russian, Ukrainians, French, anyone. In Auschwitz, they loved the following. A prisoner's head was thrown over a line of high-voltage wires, and they were ordered to retrieve it. If they didn't get it, they were shot. However, it was possible that the prisoner could have died from an electric shock. In this camp, as well as in Majdanek, there was an orchestra made up of prisoners. The advantage was clear, there were no screams and culture was present. The orchestra played 15-18 hours a day. Jews from the camps and ghettos were forced to sing a rowdy Jewish song while working. It always was of a grossly anti-Semitic nature. Above-mentioned Irma Gries, and not only her, loved Russian roulette. In Gries' enactment, it appeared as an extended process of selecting a target from a row of female prisoners using the muzzle of a pistol. For other guards, it could be a lottery where the loser would get flogged or punched. Otto Moll placed several pregnant women around a bonfire where bodies were burned in Auschwitz and shot them in the stomach. The game was a guessing one. The executioner himself and his colleagues bet how many wounded would fall into the fire and burn, and how many would fall to the side and die from the wound. It was in Poland that it became customary to turn the pursuit of escaped prisoner into a kind of sport. Rail-driven hunts were arranged. For example, they hunted escaped participants of the legendary uprising in Sobibor. Children in the camps were given candies, sometimes with potassium cyanide, and sometimes without it. It seems horrible, but everyone desired such a quick death. Kurt Franz carefully assembled a photo album featuring images of life in Treblinka, which he titled Wonderful Times. He lived to be 84 years old and had plenty of time to admire these photos. Many participants in such entertainments were sentenced by the court to only a few years in prison, while others to life but were released in 7-10 years.